Hello, I'm Austin Zilke. I will be discussing flying cars and if flying cars will be available to consumers in the near future. Since the dawn of flight, ideas for flying cars have circulated. The first design was created by Glenn Curtiss in 1917, but never flew. In 1923, the Pitcairn PCA-2 autogyro was sold on the mass market, but autogyros, which were planes that also had horizontal rotors, were more so a predecessor of the flying car. The first operational flying car was the Waterman Aerobeel, which was created from a modified Studebaker. However, only 5 were built and only 3 were roadable. 10 years later, in 1947, the Convair car was flown, but issues during test flights caused the flying car to never make it into production. Perhaps the first true and most well-known flying car was the Taylor Aerocar. It featured wings that transformed into a trailer and had a top road speed of 60 miles per hour and a top air speed of 110 miles per hour. Only 6 were ever made, and production was never achieved. The 1973 AVE Mazar was a Cessna Skymaster welded onto a Ford Pinto, but a crash during a test flight ended its dreams quickly. In 2003, the groundbreaking vertical takeoff and landing VTOL Moeller M400 performed a tethered flight, but has been unsuccessful since. In more present times, a few different flying car designs are currently being developed. In 2009, the Terrafugia Transition made its first flight, but only 2 have been produced, and the company Terrafugia seems to have shifted to a VTOL with pod approach for the future. The Aeromobile is another company designing flying cars, and they currently have a Flying Aeromobile 3.0 prototype with a Flying Aeromobile 4.0 prototype coming soon. The Klein Aircar has been in development since 2016 and has recently been performing test flights. A PAL 5 Liberty is self-proclaimed the world's first flying car production model and utilizes a gyroplane method of flight. Currently, it is road legal in Europe, but not flight certified. Furthermore, another viable future for flying cars is being incentivized by Uber for a future of flying taxis. Uber has partnered with the likes of aerospace companies such as Bell and Boeing in support of their VTOL aircraft development. This expansion of VTOL is due to the fact that they can be controlled autonomously more easily than typical aircraft and operate in places where spaces are tighter, mostly in urban environments where Uber would be relied upon heavily. Here's a video of the Klein Aerocar showing how it is able to transform from a roadworthy car into an aircraft. After going through the history of flying cars and giving a glimpse into the future, you're probably like, wow, soon I'll be able to have my own flying car, or at least take a flying Uber taxi. Unfortunately, there are many issues that must be overcome before flying cars are easily available to the consumer. The tip of the iceberg in issues pertaining to a future of flying cars is the aspect that combining the functionality of an airplane and a car results in a creation that is mediocre as both. Cars and planes were both designed to operate in vastly different environments. Planes are designed to be lightweight and have a wingspan capable of producing enough lift to allow for flight. They aren't designed to operate on roads. Cars, on the other hand, are built less with weight in mind and more focused on providing enough structure to protect their passengers in a collision. They are also smaller and more aerodynamic, as that allows for best fuel efficiency. As you can see, the functionality between a plane and car is vastly different. Combining the two makes a flying car that has a slow airspeed, slow driving speed, short range, and lacks capacity for both passengers and cargo. Okay, so they've figured out how to combine a plane and a car into a sweet and capable flying car, but in doing so, the cost of producing such a vehicle is extremely expensive. Composites are currently the best choice for a lightweight and strong airworthy material, and are very expensive. In addition, there either needs to be a power source for both the wheels and propeller, or a single power source that can switch its output from one or the other depending on the transportation mode. Next, taking a prototype and scaling it up to a full-scale production, especially for something as intensive as a flying car, is costly and will likely result in increased costs for the projected prices. Looking at projected prices, one could buy a decent-sized used airplane and a nice luxury vehicle for the price of a flying car. Finally, installing enough safety features and mechanical redundancy to make consumer flights safe will additionally increase the cost of producing flying cars. Infrastructure is another issue that must be solved regarding flying cars. Consumers who own flying cars probably would not be able to take off from highways and would need to take off from airport runways, which aren't always in convenient locations. Most likely, more runways for consumer use would need to be built in easily accessible locations. For future VTOL taxis, safe spaces to land, to pick up, and drop off passengers will be required, which would prove tricky to fit into already packed urban locations. These locations must be convenient enough that people are incentivized to use them. In addition, most of the companies currently developing VTOLs for use with Uber are powered electrically, so energy storage infrastructure is also necessary to keep the flying taxis in operation. For flying cars to be available to widespread consumers, many issues regarding an increased influx in air traffic and other legal hurdles must be overcome. Mainly, integration with commercial airspace would be required. The current air corridors must be expanded, and specific sections of the corridors must be dedicated to consumer flying cars or VTOL taxis. This would also require more dedication to air traffic control to make sure the corridors are clear, and enforcement of air corridors to make sure rules are being followed in the air. Resultingly, the already strained law enforcement would need to further enforce the skies, or the creation of a new law enforcement in charge of keeping the airways safe would be necessary. It would also require further radar tracking of flying cars to keep collisions from happening in the air. This tracking system would also be important for autonomous flying cars, which is currently what is planned for VTOL taxis. For manually piloted flying cars, the pilot must both be trained for driving the vehicle and flying it, and is usually expensive and time-consuming to acquire a pilot's license. Noise is another huge issue. With an available method of personal consumer flight, airspace would become more congested and therefore noisier, especially if additional runways were constructed in more convenient locations. For VTOLs, current designs plan on using multiple rotors to produce lift. This creates a lot of noise. Just imagine the sound from a drone scaled up to a size capable of carrying multiple people. In noisy urban areas with strict noise ordinances, the sounds created by flying cars will be a huge issue. Flying cars also need to be both flight certified by the FAA and certified for use as an automobile. In addition, the flying car must also be maintained and inspected extremely frequently, likely before each use, to ensure that it is safe to use and flight-worthy. Being driven on the road provides for further exposure towards damaging flight necessary capabilities. With regards to this, methods in the design must be taken to avoid failure in the air at all costs. The flying car needs to have proper safety features and redundancy. At the beginning of this presentation, you might have thought, well, when will we start seeing flying cars in the sky above? However, due to issues that remain prevalent in preventing flying cars from being accessible by the consumer in the near future, I believe it is safe to say that it will be quite a while before flying cars become attainable. Thank you.